Nisha, a caring and compassionate young woman, had always felt called to help others in need. Ever since she was a little girl, she would go out of her way to comfort those who were hurting or struggling. It came as no surprise to her loved ones when she decided to become a nurse, dedicating her life to healing and supporting patients during their most vulnerable moments. Nisha worked the night shift at the local hospital, a job that suited her natural tendencies as a night owl. She found a deep sense of purpose in being there for her patients during the long, often lonely hours of the night when fears and worries seemed to loom larger. Every evening around 9 p.m., she would leave her cozy apartment, ready to face whatever challenges the night might bring. Unbeknownst to Nisha, her elderly neighbor, a kind-hearted gentleman everyone affectionately called Pops, had taken an interest in her nightly routine. Pops was a retired widower who spent much of his time people-watching from his living room window. He couldn't help but notice the dedicated young nurse leaving for work each night like clockwork. Pops would smile to himself, wondering what sort of person Nisha was and admiring her tireless commitment to her patients. One particularly dark and stormy evening, as Nisha hurried out to start her shift, Pops noticed an unfamiliar figure lurking in the shadows near her apartment building. An uneasy feeling settled in his gut as he watched the stranger's movements, which seemed to follow Nisha's path. Pops furrowed his brow, concerned for the young woman's safety. He made a mental note to keep a closer eye on her comings and goings from that point forward. As the weeks passed, Pops began to notice a curious pattern. Each night when Nisha left for work, a different car would be waiting for her at the street corner. The vehicles varied in make and model, but they all had one thing in common: tinted windows that made it impossible to see who was inside. Pop's worry grew with each passing day, his imagination conjuring up all sorts of troubling scenarios. Unable to shake his concerns, Pops finally decided he needed to take action. One chilly autumn evening, he threw on his coat and followed Nisha at a discreet distance as she made her way to the waiting car. His heart raced as the vehicle pulled away from the curb, and he quickly hailed a taxi to tail them. The cab driver gave Pops a curious look, but didn't ask any questions as they set off into the night. The car carrying Nisha wound its way through the city streets, eventually turning onto a quiet road leading to the outskirts of town. Pops instructed the taxi driver to hang back, not wanting to be spotted. They came to a stop near an old, abandoned warehouse, and Pops watched as Nisha exited the car and disappeared inside the dilapidated building. His mind raced with possibilities, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. Pops paid the taxi driver and crept closer to the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached a grimy window, he could hear muffled voices coming from inside. Peering through the smudged glass, Pops was stunned by what he saw. Nisha, now wearing different clothes, was seated at a table with a group of women, all of whom looked tired and frightened. Nisha spoke to them softly, her face filled with compassion and understanding. It suddenly dawned on Pops that Nisha was part of a secret organization dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence escape their abusers. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The different cars each night were part of an underground network that transported these brave women to safety, and the warehouse served as a temporary haven where they could catch their breath and plan their next steps. Tears welled up in Pop's eyes as he watched Nisha comfort a young mother and her child, offering them words of encouragement and support. He felt a surge of pride and admiration for the selfless nurse, who not only dedicated her nights to caring for patients at the hospital, but also put herself at risk to help some of the most vulnerable members of their community. The next evening, as Nisha was leaving for work, Pops gathered the courage to approach her. Nisha was surprised to see her elderly neighbor waiting for her outside, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and respect. Pops gently explained that he had followed her the previous night and discovered her secret. Nisha's eyes widened, fear and uncertainty flickering across her face. But Pops quickly reassured her, expressing his deepest admiration for her bravery and selflessness. He shared his own story of growing up in a home marred by domestic violence and how he wished someone like Nisha had been there to help his mother. As they talked, Nisha began to open up about her own past and the events that had led her to start the underground organization. Over the coming weeks and months, Pops became an unlikely but invaluable ally in Nisha's cause. He offered financial support from his modest savings and used his connections within the community to help the organization grow. Together, they worked tirelessly to expand their reach, determined to help as many individuals in need as possible. As the years passed, Nisha's organization evolved into a well-respected and widely recognized resource for domestic violence victims in their city. The humble warehouse that had once served as a temporary safe haven was transformed into a welcoming, fully equipped shelter, complete with counseling services and legal support. Nisha and Pops grew closer, their friendship a testament to the power of compassion and the unbreakable bonds formed in the face of adversity. They often sat together in the shelter's cozy common room, sipping tea and reminiscing about the night that had brought them together and changed the course of so many lives. For Nisha, her nightly departures were no longer just a routine. They had become a symbol of hope for those who had once felt trapped in the darkness of abuse. And for Pops, watching Nisha leave each evening filled him with a sense of pride and purpose, knowing that he played a small but significant role in her vital mission. As they continued their work, Nisha and Pops knew that their journey was far from over. There would always be more lives to touch, more hearts to heal, and more voices to empower. But armed with an unshakable determination and the knowledge that they had each other's support, they faced the future with hope in their hearts, ready to make a difference, one brave soul at a time. As Nisha and Pop's secret organization grew, so did the challenges they faced. Running a shelter for domestic violence survivors was no easy feat, and they often found themselves stretched thin, both emotionally and financially. But their unwavering commitment to the cause kept them going, even on the most difficult days. One particularly challenging case involved a young woman named Leila, who had arrived at the shelter with her 2 young children in tow. Leila was terrified and traumatized, having endured years of abuse at the hands of her husband. Nisha spent countless hours by her side, listening to her story and offering comfort and support. Leila's husband, a powerful and well-connected businessman, had used his influence to track her down in the past, forcing her to flee from one safe house to another. Nisha knew that they would need to be extra cautious to ensure Leila's safety, and she worked tirelessly to secure a long-term protective order and find a permanent housing solution for the young family. Pops, meanwhile, took on the role of a surrogate grandfather to Leila's children who had been starved for affection and stability. He would spend hours playing with them, reading them stories, and teaching them simple life skills like tying their shoes and making their beds. The children blossomed under his care, their laughter echoing through the shelter's halls and bringing joy to everyone around them. As they worked to support Leila and her children, Nisha and Pops also grappled with the challenges of running a growing organization. They needed to secure funding, hire additional staff, and navigate the complex legal and bureaucratic landscape of the social services world. There were times when they felt overwhelmed and unsure of their ability to keep the shelter afloat, but they leaned on each other for strength and encouragement. One evening, as they sat in Nisha's cozy office, sipping tea and going over budget spreadsheets, Pops turned to her with a twinkle in his eye. "You know," he said, "I never imagined I'd be spending my golden years running a secret domestic violence shelter. But I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." Nisha smiled, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected partnership that had brought so much meaning to her life. "I couldn't do this without you, Pops," she said softly. "You've been my rock through all of this." Pops reached out and patted her hand, his weathered skin warm and comforting against hers. "We're in this together, kiddo," he said, "and together we're going to keep making a difference, one life at a time." As the months passed, Leila and her children began to heal and thrive, thanks in no small part to the love and support they received at the shelter. Leila found a job at a local daycare center, and with Nisha's help, she was able to secure a small apartment of her own. The day she and her children moved out of the shelter was bittersweet, filled with tears of joy and gratitude. Nisha and Pops stood on the shelter's front steps, waving goodbye as Leila drove away, her children's faces pressed against the car windows. They knew that there would be challenges ahead for the young family, but they also knew that they had given them the tools and support they needed to build a better life. As they turned to head back inside, Pops draped an arm around Nisha's shoulders, his face etched with a mix of pride and determination. "We did good, kiddo," he said softly, "but there's still so much work to be done." Nisha nodded, her mind already racing with plans for the future. She knew that there were countless more women and children out there who needed their help, and she was more determined than ever to reach them. Over the years, Nisha and Pop's organization continued to grow and evolve, adapting to the changing needs of their community. They expanded their services to include job training, counseling, and legal advocacy, working tirelessly to empower survivors and break the cycle of abuse. There were setbacks and heartbreaks along the way, moments when the darkness of the world seemed overwhelming. But through it all, Nisha and Pops remained steadfast in their commitment to each other and to their cause. As they grew older, they began to think about the future of the organization and the legacy they wanted to leave behind. They knew that they wouldn't be able to do this work forever, but they were determined to ensure that it would continue long after they were gone. They started to train younger volunteers and staff members, passing on their knowledge and experience to a new generation of advocates. They also worked to build partnerships with other organizations and community leaders, creating a network of support that would sustain their mission for years to come. And through it all, Nisha and Pop's friendship continued to deepen and grow. They were more than just partners in this work. They were family, bound by a love and commitment that transcended blood ties. One quiet evening, as they sat together in the shelter's garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Pops turned to Nisha with a soft smile on his face. "You know," he said, "when I first started watching you leave for work all those years ago, I never could have imagined the journey we would end up on together." Nisha nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never could have done any of this without you, Pops," she said softly. "You've been my strength, my guide, and my friend through it all." Pops reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We've done a lot of good together, kiddo," he said, "but there's still so much more to do. As long as there are people out there who need our help, we'll keep fighting. Together." Nisha squeezed his hand, her heart filled with a fierce determination. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Pops by her side and the power of their shared mission driving them forward, she knew that anything was possible. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Nisha and Pops sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They knew that the work of healing and empowerment was never truly done, that there would always be more lives to touch and more hearts to mend. But they also knew that they had each other, and that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their story was one of resilience, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship, a testament to the power of the human spirit to triumph over even the darkest of circumstances. And so, as the night deepened around them, Nisha and Pops sat hand in hand, ready to continue their journey of hope and healing, one brave step at a time. As the years went by, Nisha and Pop's shelter became a beacon of hope for countless survivors of domestic violence. Their tireless efforts had created a ripple effect of change, inspiring others in the community to get involved and support their cause. One of the most remarkable transformations they witnessed was that of a woman named Zara. When Zara first arrived at the shelter, she was a shell of her former self, broken down by years of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her partner. She was skittish and withdrawn, barely able to make eye contact or speak above a whisper. But with time, patience, and the unwavering support of Nisha and the shelter staff, Zara slowly began to heal. She attended therapy sessions and support groups, learning to process her trauma and rediscover her own strength and resilience. Nisha worked closely with her, helping her develop a plan to rebuild her life and create a safe, stable future for herself. As Zara grew stronger, she also began to find her voice. She started volunteering at the shelter, using her own experiences to help other women who were just starting their journey to recovery. Her quiet strength and compassion made her a natural leader, and soon she was running support groups and workshops of her own. Pops, who had always had a soft spot for Zara, watched her transformation with a sense of awe and pride. He saw in her the same spirit of resilience and determination that had first drawn him to Nisha all those years ago, and he knew that she was destined for great things. One evening, as Nisha and Pops were closing up the shelter for the night, Zara approached them with a nervous energy. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've decided to go back to school. I want to become a social worker so I can help other women like me." Nisha and Pops exchanged a glance, their eyes shining with pride and joy. They knew how much courage it had taken for Zara to make this decision, and they were thrilled to see her taking control of her own destiny. "That's wonderful, Zara," Nisha said, pulling her into a warm hug. "We're so proud of you, and we'll support you every step of the way." Pops nodded in agreement, his face splitting into a wide grin. "You're going to be an amazing social worker," he said. "Those women won't know what hit 'em." Zara laughed, her eyes filling with tears of gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said. "You've given me a second chance at life, and I won't waste it." As Zara left the shelter that night, Nisha and Pops watched her go with a sense of bittersweet pride. They knew that her journey was just beginning, and that there would be challenges and setbacks along the way. But they also knew that she had the strength and resilience to overcome anything that life threw at her. In the years that followed, Zara became a force to be reckoned with in the world of social work. She graduated at the top of her class and quickly rose through the ranks at a local nonprofit, earning a reputation as a fierce advocate for survivors of domestic violence. She never forgot the shelter that had given her a second chance, and she remained a close friend and ally to Nisha and Pops. She would often stop by for tea and conversation, sharing stories of the women she had helped and the challenges she had faced. Nisha and Pops, meanwhile, continued to pour their hearts and souls into the shelter. They expanded their services to include legal advocacy and job training, working tirelessly to give their clients the tools they needed to build independent, fulfilling lives. But as the years went on, they also began to feel the weight of their own mortality. They knew that they wouldn't be able to run the shelter forever, and they started to think about what would happen to their life's work when they were gone. They had always been private people, never seeking recognition or accolades for their work. But as they started to plan for the future of the shelter, they realized that they needed to start thinking about their own legacy as well. They began to work with a local writer to document their story, sharing the triumphs and challenges of their journey with a candor and honesty that surprised even themselves. They spoke about the women they had helped and the lives they had changed, but also about their own struggles and doubts along the way. As they pored over old photos and memories, Nisha and Pops were struck by how much had changed since those early days when they had first started watching each other from across the street. They had both grown older and wiser, weathered by the joys and sorrows of a life spent in service to others. But through it all, their friendship had remained a constant, a source of strength and comfort in even the darkest of times. They had leaned on each other through countless challenges and setbacks, always finding a way to keep going even when the road ahead seemed impossible. One evening, as they sat together in the shelter's cozy living room, Nisha turned to Pops with a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," she said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what we've built here. And I can't help but feel like it's not just about the shelter itself, but about something bigger." Pops nodded, his eyes shining with understanding. "It's about the power of connection," he said. "The way that two people can come together and create something that changes lives, even in the darkest of circumstances." Nisha smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "I never could have done any of this without you," she said. "You've been my partner, my friend, and my family through it all." Pops reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "We've built something beautiful here," he said softly. "Something that will outlast us both. And I couldn't be more proud to have done it by your side." As the evening wore on, Nisha and Pops sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would always be more work to be done and more lives to touch. But they also knew that they had each other, and that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their story was one of resilience, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship, a testament to the power of the human spirit to create light in even the darkest of places. And so, as the night deepened around them, Nisha and Pops held each other close, ready to continue their journey of hope and healing, one brave step at a time. They knew that their legacy would live on long after they were gone, carried forward by the countless lives they had touched and the seeds of change they had planted along the way. As the years passed and Nisha and Pops grew older, they began to think more deeply about the future of their beloved shelter. They knew that they wouldn't be able to run it forever, and they wanted to ensure that their life's work would continue long after they were gone. They started to search for someone who could take over the day-to-day operations of the shelter, someone who shared their passion and commitment to helping survivors of domestic violence. They interviewed countless candidates, but none of them seemed quite right, until they met Amara. Amara was a young woman with a fierce intelligence and a heart full of compassion. She had survived an abusive relationship herself and had gone on to become a successful lawyer, dedicating her career to advocating for women's rights. When she heard about the opportunity to lead Nisha and Pop's shelter, she knew that she had found her true calling. She met with Nisha and Pops, and the three of them talked for hours, sharing their stories and their dreams for the future. Nisha and Pops were impressed by Amara's passion and dedication, and they knew that they had found the perfect person to carry on their legacy. They offered her the job on the spot, and Amara accepted with tears of joy and gratitude. Over the next few months, Nisha and Pops worked closely with Amara to transition her into her new role. They introduced her to the staff and the clients and helped her navigate the complex web of funding and regulations that kept the shelter running. Amara proved to be a quick study, and she brought a fresh energy and perspective to the work. She had ideas for new programs and initiatives, and she worked tirelessly to secure the funding and support they needed to make them a reality. As Nisha and Pops started to step back from the day-to-day operations of the shelter, they'd found themselves reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. They thought back to those early days, when they had first started watching each other from across the street, never imagining the path that lay ahead of them. They remembered the challenges and setbacks they had faced along the way, the moments of doubt and despair when they had wondered if they were making any difference at all. But they also remembered the triumphs and the joys, the countless lives they had touched, and the seeds of hope they had planted. One evening, as they sat together in Nisha's cozy living room, Pops turned to her with a twinkle in his eye. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about what we should do with all our newfound free time. Maybe we should take up ballroom dancing." Nisha laughed, shaking her head at the image of Pops twirling her around the dance floor. "I think I'll stick to my knitting," she said. "But maybe we could start a book club. I've always wanted to read more of the classics." Pops grinned, his face crinkling with mischief. "Or we could start a band," he said. "I've always fancied myself a bit of a rock star." Nisha snorted, rolling her eyes at his antics. "I think we'll leave the rock stardom to the younger generation," she said. "But I like the idea of a book club. We could invite some of the other volunteers from the shelter, make it a regular thing." Pops nodded, his expression growing serious. "I think that's a great idea," he said. "It's important to stay connected to the work, even if we're not in the thick of it anymore. And who knows, maybe we'll even find our next great adventure in the pages of a book." Nisha smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for the man who had been her partner and her friend through it all. "I have a feeling that our greatest adventure is still ahead of us," she said softly, "and I can't wait to see where it takes us." As the weeks and months passed, Nisha and Pops settled into their new roles as mentors and advisors to the shelter. They attended board meetings and fundraisers, and they continued to be a presence in the lives of the women and children they had helped over the years. They also started their book club, which quickly became a beloved tradition among the shelter's volunteers and staff. They would gather once a month in Nisha's living room, discussing everything from classic novels to contemporary memoirs, and sharing stories and laughter over cups of tea and homemade cookies. Through it all, Nisha and Pops remained as close as ever, their friendship a constant source of strength and comfort in a world that could be cruel and unpredictable. They had seen the worst of humanity, but they had also seen the best, the incredible resilience and courage of the women they had helped, and the power of love and compassion to transform even the darkest of circumstances. One evening, as they sat together in Nisha's living room after a particularly lively book club meeting, Pops turned to her with a serious expression on his face. "I need to tell you something," he said softly, "something I've been meaning to say for a long time." Nisha felt a flicker of concern, wondering what could be troubling her old friend. "What is it, Pops?" she asked gently. "You know you can tell me anything." Pops took a deep breath, his eyes shining with emotion. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for everything. For being my friend, my partner, my family. I never could have done any of this without you, and I'm so grateful for every moment we've had together." Nisha felt tears spring to her eyes, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," she said. "You've been my rock, my anchor, my guiding light. I never could have made it through all of this without you by my side." Pops reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "We've had a good run, haven't we?" he said softly. "And I have a feeling that the best is yet to come." Nisha nodded, her eyes shining with hope and determination. "I think you're right," she said. "We may be getting older, but we're not done yet. There's still so much more we can do, so many more lives we can touch." And so, as the evening wore on and the stars twinkled in the sky outside, Nisha and Pops sat hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future might bring. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would always be more work to be done and more challenges to overcome. But they also knew that they had each other, and that together they could weather any storm. Their story was one of resilience, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship, a testament to the power of the human spirit to create light in even the darkest of places. And as they looked back on all they had accomplished and all the lives they had changed, Nisha and Pops knew that they had truly lived a life worth living. They had fought the good fight, and they had made a difference in the world, one brave, compassionate act at a time. As the years went by, Nisha and Pops continued to be a constant presence at the shelter, even as they stepped back from the day-to-day operations. They attended fundraisers and events, and they were always available to offer guidance and support to Amara and the rest of the staff. But as much as they loved the work, they also knew that they needed to start thinking about their own futures. They had both given so much of themselves to the shelter, and they wanted to make sure that they had something to sustain them in their golden years. One evening, as they sat together in Pop's cozy living room, Nisha turned to him with a thoughtful expression on her face. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what we should do next, about how we can make sure that the shelter is taken care of, even after we're gone." Pops nodded, his eyes shining with understanding. "I've been thinking about that too," he said. "And I have an idea. What if we started a foundation? Something that could provide ongoing support to the shelter, even after we're no longer here to do it ourselves." Nisha's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face. "That's a brilliant idea," she said. "We could set it up as an endowment so that the shelter would always have a source of funding. And we could name it after the women who have inspired us over the years, the survivors, the fighters, the ones who never gave up." Pops grinned, his face crinkling with excitement. "I love it," he said. "The Resilience Foundation. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Nisha nodded, her heart swelling with pride and purpose. "It's perfect," she said, "and I think it's exactly what we need to do. Not just for the shelter, but for ourselves too. A way to make sure that our legacy lives on, long after we're gone." Over the next few months, Nisha and Pops threw themselves into the work of setting up the foundation. They met with lawyers and financial advisors, and they pored over endless paperwork and legal documents. It was a daunting task, but they approached it with the same passion and determination that had driven them throughout their lives. They knew that this was their chance to make a real, lasting difference in the world, and they were determined to get it right. As they worked, they also began to think about their own personal legacies. They had both lived long, full lives, and they wanted to make sure that they left behind something meaningful, not just for the shelter, but for the people they loved. Nisha started to write her memoirs, chronicling her journey from a young nurse to a fierce advocate for domestic violence survivors. She wrote about the women she had helped over the years and the lessons she had learned about resilience, compassion, and the power of the human spirit. Pops, meanwhile, began to work on a series of paintings, vivid, colorful canvases that captured the beauty and the pain of the world he had seen. He painted the women of the shelter, their faces etched with hope and determination, and he painted the children, their eyes wide with wonder and innocence. Together, Nisha and Pops poured their hearts and souls into their work, knowing that they were creating something that would outlast them both. They had always been private people, but they knew that their stories needed to be told, not for their own sake, but for the sake of the countless lives they had touched. As the months turned into years, the Resilience Foundation began to take shape. Nisha and Pops worked tirelessly to secure funding and support, and they watched with pride as the endowment grew larger and larger. They knew that the foundation would provide a vital source of support for the shelter, ensuring that it could continue its work for generations to come. But they also knew that it was about more than just money. It was about the message of hope and resilience that they had spent their lives trying to spread. One evening, as they sat together in the shelter's cozy living room, surrounded by the artwork and the memoirs that they had created, Nisha turned to Pops with tears in her eyes. I can't believe we did it, she said softly. I can't believe we actually made this happen. Pops reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. We did it together, he said, just like we've done everything else, and I couldn't be more proud of what we've accomplished. Nisha nodded, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. I couldn't have done any of this without you, she said. You've been my partner, my friend, my family, and I will always be grateful for that. Pop smiled, his eyes shining with emotion. I feel the same way, he said. You've given my life purpose and meaning, and I wouldn't trade a single moment of it for anything in the world. As the evening wore on and the candles burned low, Nisha and Pops sat hand in hand, reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. They knew that their work was far from over, that there would always be more women to help, more lives to touch, more stories to tell. But they also knew that they had created something truly special, a legacy of hope and resilience that would live on long after they were gone. They had poured their hearts and souls into the shelter and the foundation, and they knew that their work would continue to make a difference in the world, one brave and compassionate act at a time. And so, as the night grew late and the stars twinkled in the sky outside, Nisha and Pops held each other close, their hearts full of love and gratitude for the incredible journey they had shared. They had faced countless challenges and setbacks along the way, but they had always had each other, and that had made all the difference. They knew that the road ahead would be filled with twists and turns, with moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and heartbreak, but they also knew that they would face it all together, hand in hand, heart to heart. And as they looked back on all they had accomplished and all the lives they had changed, Nisha and Pops knew that they had truly lived a life worth living. They had fought the good fight, and they had made a difference in the world, one brave, compassionate act at a time. Their story was one of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of love and friendship, and it would live on long after they were gone, inspiring countless others to follow in their footsteps and make the world a brighter, more compassionate place. Years turned into decades, and Nisha and Pops grew older and wiser with each passing day. Their hair turned silver and their steps slowed, but their hearts remained as full of love and compassion as ever. They watched with pride as the Shelter and the Resilience Foundation flourished under Amara's leadership. The endowment they had created provided a steady stream of funding, allowing the shelter to expand its services and reach even more women in need. But even as they celebrated the success of their life's work, Nisha and Pops knew that they couldn't take their remaining time together for granted. They had always been there for each other, through thick and thin, but they knew that the day would come when one of them would have to say goodbye. And so they made a pact to live each day to the fullest, to cherish every moment they had together. They took long walks in the park, hand in hand, and they sat for hours in cozy cafes, sipping tea and sharing stories. They also continued to be a presence at the shelter, volunteering their time and expertise whenever they could. They led art classes and writing workshops, and they mentored the younger staff members who looked up to them as role models and guides. But as much as they loved their work, they also knew that they needed to make time for themselves. And so they started to travel, exploring new places and experiencing new adventures together. They took a hot air balloon ride over the desert at sunrise, marveling at the vast expanse of sand and sky. They hiked through lush rainforests and swam in crystal-clear waterfalls, feeling the rush of adrenaline and the joy of being alive. And through it all, they held each other close, knowing that they were blessed to have found each other and to have shared such an incredible journey together. One evening, as they sat on a beach watching the sunset, Pops turned to Nisha with a serious expression on his face. "I need to tell you something," he said softly, "something I've been thinking about for a long time." Nisha felt a flicker of concern, wondering what could be troubling her dear friend. "What is it, Pops?" she asked gently. "You know you can tell me anything." Pops took a deep breath, his eyes shining with emotion. "I want you to know how much you mean to me," he said, "how much you've changed my life. I was lost before I met you, just going through the motions without any real purpose or direction, but you showed me what it means to live a life of meaning, to make a difference in the world, and I will always be grateful for that." Nisha felt tears spring to her eyes, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I feel the same way," she said. "You've been my rock, my constant companion, my truest friend. I couldn't have done any of this without you, and I wouldn't want to imagine my life without you in it." Pops smiled, his face etched with lines of laughter and love. "I want you to promise me something," he said. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, you'll always remember how much you mean to me. Promise me that you'll always keep fighting the good fight, even when I'm no longer here to fight it with you." Nisha nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "I promise," she said. "I promise to always remember and to always keep fighting. For you, for me, for all the women we've helped and all the ones we haven't reached yet. I promise to never give up, no matter what." Pops reached out and took her hand, his grip strong and steady. "I love you, Nisha," he said simply. "I always have, and I always will." Nisha squeezed his hand, her heart full to bursting. "I love you too, Pops," she said, "more than words can say." And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Nisha and Pops sat hand in hand, their hearts full of love and gratitude for the incredible journey they had shared. They knew that the future was uncertain, that there would be challenges and sorrows still to come. But they also knew that they had each other, and that together they could face anything. They had built a life of purpose and meaning, a legacy of hope and resilience that would live on long after they were gone. And as they looked back on all they had accomplished and all the lives they had changed, Nisha and Pops knew that they had truly lived a life worth living. They had fought the good fight, and they had made a difference in the world, one brave, compassionate act at a time. Their story was one of love, friendship, and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of circumstances, and it would be told for generations to come, inspiring countless others to follow in their footsteps and make the world a brighter, more compassionate place. Years later, long after Nisha and Pops had passed on, their legacy lived on in the shelter and the foundation that bore their names. Women who had never met them, who had never even heard their story, found hope and healing within those walls. And as those women went on to build lives of their own, to find love and purpose and meaning in the world, they carried with them the spirit of Nisha and Pops, the unbreakable spirit of resilience and compassion that had changed the world, one life at a time. For that was the true magic of Nisha and Pop's story, not just the lives they had touched directly, but the ripple effect of their love and kindness spreading out across the world like a stone dropped into a still pond. And though they were gone, their presence could still be felt in the laughter of children playing in the shelter's sunny courtyard, in the tears of women finding the courage to start anew, in the quiet moments of reflection and gratitude that filled the hearts of all who knew them. Nisha and Pops had lived a life of purpose and meaning, a life filled with love and laughter and the kind of friendship that comes along once in a lifetime. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. The simple, powerful truth that every life has the power to make a difference, to change the world for the better, one small act of love at a time. As the years turned to decades and the decades to centuries, the story of Nisha and Pops lived on, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to triumph over darkness and despair. And though the world around them changed and evolved, the essence of their story remained the same, a reminder that even in the face of the greatest challenges, love and compassion will always find a way to shine through. As the sun began to set on their lives, Nisha and Pops knew that they had one final journey to make together. They had lived a life filled with purpose and meaning, but they also knew that there was one last place they needed to go, one last story they needed to tell. And so, on a crisp autumn morning, they packed their bags and set out on a road trip across the country, retracing the steps of their lives and the lives of the women they had helped along the way. They started at the shelter, the place where it had all begun. As they walked through the familiar halls and gardens, they were flooded with memories of the countless women and children who had passed through those doors, each one a story of resilience and hope. They sat in the cozy living room where they had shared so many cups of tea and heartfelt conversations, and they marveled at how far they had come, how much they had achieved in their lifetimes. From there, they set out on the open road, driving through rolling hills and sprawling cities, stopping at landmarks and hidden gems along the way. They visited the hometowns of the women they had helped, meeting their families and hearing their stories of triumph and survival. They'd also made new memories of their own, trying local cuisines and exploring off-the-beaten-path destinations. They laughed until their sides ached and cried until their eyes ran dry, savoring every moment of their precious time together. As they drove, they talked about their lives and their legacy, about the shelter and the foundation that would carry on their work long after they were gone. They spoke of the women they had known and loved, the ones who had touched their hearts and changed their lives in countless ways. And through it all, they held each other close, knowing that their love and friendship was the greatest gift of all, the one thing that had sustained them through the ups and downs of their incredible journey. One evening, as they sat by a crackling campfire under a star-strewn sky, Nisha turned to Pops with a wistful look in her eye. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met?" she asked softly. "If our paths had never crossed all those years ago?" Pops smiled, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. "I don't wonder," he said, "because I know that we were meant to find each other, meant to walk this path together. You and me, Nisha, we're two halves of the same whole. And I wouldn't trade a single moment of our journey for anything in the world." Nisha felt tears spring to her eyes, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I feel the same way," she said. "You've been my constant, my true north through everything. And I know that wherever this road takes us, we'll face it together, just like we always have." Pops reached out and took her hand, his touch as comforting and familiar as ever. "I have one last promise to make to you," he said, "one last vow before the end." Nisha nodded, her eyes locked on his. "Anything," she said. "Anything at all." Pops took a deep breath, his voice steady and clear. "I promise to love you until my last breath," he said. "To stand by your side, no matter what comes our way. To be your partner, your friend, your family, until the very end. And even beyond that, in whatever comes next." Nisha felt a sob catch in her throat, her vision blurred by tears. "I promise the same," she said. "To love you, to cherish you, to fight for you always. In this life and the next, and every one after that." They sealed their promise with a kiss, their lips meeting in a tender embrace that held the weight of a lifetime of love and devotion. And as they held each other close, they knew that they had found something rare and precious, a bond that could never be broken, not by time or distance, or even death itself. The next morning, they set out on the final leg of their journey, driving towards the ocean that had always called to their hearts. They had decided to spend their last days by the sea, watching the waves crash against the shore and feeling the salt spray on their skin. As they drove, they talked and laughed and reminisced, their voices mingling with the rumble of the engine and the rush of the wind. They spoke of the past and the present, of the joys and the sorrows that had shaped their lives. And they spoke of the future too, of the legacy they had built and the hope they had kindled in the hearts of so many. When they finally reached the coast, they knew that they had come home, in every sense of the word. They rented a small cottage by the sea, filling it with mementos and treasures from their long and winding road. They spent their days walking hand in hand along the shore, collecting seashells and watching the seabirds wheel overhead. They sat on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea and watching the sun sink into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And as the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, they knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, exactly who they were meant to be. Two old friends, two kindred spirits, two halves of the same beautiful, unbreakable whole. One morning, as the sun rose over the ocean, Nisha woke to find Pops still asleep beside her, his face peaceful and serene. She watched him for a long moment, her heart full of love and gratitude for the man who had been her rock, her shelter, her home for so many years. And as she lay back down beside him, her hand finding his in the soft morning light, she knew that their story was coming to an end, but that their love would live on forever, a beacon of hope and resilience in a world that so desperately needed it. They had faced countless challenges and triumphs together, had walked through the valleys and climbed the mountains of life hand in hand. And now, as they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, they knew that they had truly lived, truly loved, in every sense of the word. Their story was not a fairy tale, not a perfect, polished narrative tied up with a neat little bow. It was messy and complicated and achingly, breathtakingly real. It was a story of two imperfect people who had found each other in the midst of life's storms, who had held on tight and never let go. And as their eyes closed for the final time, their hearts beating in perfect sync, Nisha and Pops knew that they had left behind a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love and compassion, of hope and resilience, of the power of the human spirit to shine bright even in the darkest of times. Their story had been a gift, a precious treasure that they had shared with the world. And now, as they took their final breaths, they knew that their love would live on, a shining example of what it means to live a life of purpose and meaning, a life filled with joy and sorrow and everything in between. And so, as the sun set on their final day, Nisha and Pops slipped away together, their hearts full of love and peace, and the quiet certainty that they had made a difference, that they had mattered in the grand tapestry of life. Their story had been a beautiful one, a tale of two souls who had found each other against all odds and had never let go. And though they were gone, their love would live on forever, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always light, always the chance for a new beginning. As the news of their passing spread, the shelter and the foundation that bore their names were flooded with messages of love and support from the countless lives they had touched. Women who had found safety and solace within those walls, children who had grown up with their love and guidance, friends and family who had been blessed to know them and to love them. And as the world mourned the loss of two extraordinary souls, it also celebrated the legacy they had left behind, the countless seeds of hope and compassion they had planted along the way. Nisha and Pops had lived a life of purpose and meaning, a life filled with love and laughter and the kind of friendship that comes along once in a lifetime. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all, the simple, powerful truth that every life has the power to make a difference, to change the world for the better, one small act of love at a time. As the years turned to decades and beyond, the story of Nisha and Pops passed into legend, a shining example of the very best of humanity. And though the details may have faded with time, the essence of their love endured, a beacon of hope and inspiration for generations to come. For in the end, that was the true magic of their story, not the grand gestures or the sweeping declarations, but the quiet, everyday moments of love and compassion, the small kindnesses and unbreakable bonds that had sustained them through a lifetime of ups and downs. Nisha and Pops had shown the world what it means to live a life of love, to find purpose and meaning in even the darkest of times. And though they were gone, their legacy lived on, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to triumph over adversity and to find beauty in the most unexpected of places. And so, as the sun set on their story for the final time, the world held its breath and gave thanks for the gift of Nisha and Pops, two ordinary people who had lived an extraordinary life and who had left the world a little brighter, a little kinder than they had found it. Their story had been a love letter to the human spirit, a reminder that even the smallest acts of compassion can change the course of history. And though they were gone, their love would live on forever, a shining example of what it means to live a life worth living, a life filled with purpose and meaning, and the kind of love that never dies. The end.